Hello and welcome. I am your host for the evening, Goblin Queen, and tonight I'm going to read some first-hand paranormal experiences that I found from around the internet. They come from a couple of different sources: Reddit, Your Ghost Stories, one or two others, and there is a theme that ties these stories together. I guess that theme would be strange animals. You'll see what I mean as we get into the stories, but some of the animals in these experiences are larger than they would normally appear. Some of them are humanoid in the way that they stand on their hind legs or speak. And this is quite a folklore-heavy episode as well, because these encounters did bring up different beings and aspects of different cultures' folklore. So in between the stories, I'll be taking a look at different beings and creatures across the world. We have Irish, Japanese, Filipino, Portuguese, and possibly more. So let's go ahead and get started. This first story is going to come from the paranormal subreddit. When my husband was younger, ages 5 through 10th grade, he recalls seeing a cat that would stand upright like a man who was about 5 foot 5 inches tall. The cat always wore overalls or some sort of coveralls, and sometimes wore a felt or straw hat. He would see the cat from the corner of his eye in the reflection of a mirror or walking by a window. And when he looked, the cat would not disappear. The cat would stay until he blinked or after he finally looked away. Then it would just disappear. He recalls the cat watching him. Once, the cat spoke a few words, but not to him. It was as though he was talking to someone else. This happened more frequently when he was younger, but the last time he saw it was in the mirror of the school bathroom when he was in 10th grade. Do you guys have any idea about what this could have been? I was thinking that perhaps this is some being from another dimension or something. Honestly, I don't know. I've had a ton of paranormal experiences, but strictly with shadow people and spirits. I know it sounds silly, but I can vouch that my husband is not crazy and does not hallucinate. All right, so I'm going to hop into the comments for a moment, or more than a moment, and then in a little while we will come back to the story because the OP does give some updates on their overall wearing giant cat saga. Someone in the comments says, "Sounds like a fairy to me," which they do not elaborate on, but I'll do my best to connect the dots from this strange cat in the story we read to fairies. The rest of their comments will give us our next clue. They go on to say, "Check out this animated film." Then they give a link to the Wikipedia page for a movie called The Cat Returns. Now, if you aren't familiar with this film, it's a Japanese animated movie from 2002, released by famed production company Studio Ghibli. Or Ghibli. I say Ghibli, I'm not sure which is right. Many people are big fans and followers of Studio Ghibli films, myself included. I adore their movies, and I've seen The Cat Returns several times. Basically, it's about a high school student who ends up saving a cat from being struck by a car while it is crossing the street. Much to her surprise, she subsequently discovers that cats can talk, have their own kingdom, and can walk upright, much like the cat in our story. The film most likely plays on the Japanese legends of bakeneko, or changing cats. Changing cat is the most accurate translation, but sometimes it is translated as goblin cat, which deserves an honorable mention. Japan has a whole host of supernatural cats called kaibyo, and the bakeneko also sometimes falls under the umbrella of yokai. Defining what yokai are is tricky. Much like defining what fairies are is tricky, although some may not realize it due to the watered-down version we are most often presented with in modern Western media. Many Westerners equate the term or concept of yokai with monsters, and although they often are quite frightening, monster might be too simple a word to describe the varied beings that make up the supernatural category of yokai. Some yokai are inanimate objects, such as umbrellas or paper lanterns, that become sentient and animate after they have existed for over 100 years, and then they sprout eyes, usually just one, actually, and lolling tongues, and can move about on their own, sometimes hopping around on one foot, much to the shock of anyone who comes upon them. Some appear as humans with distorted features, such as the Rokuro Kubi, who looks like a normal woman until her neck stretches and elongates like silly putty, her head floating and bobbing at the top in a ghostly fashion. Still others are real animals, such as tanuki or raccoon dogs, foxes, or domestic cats, who are otherwise normal except for their ability to shapeshift, such is the case with the bakeneko. Bakeneko are said to be domestic cats who have lived past their natural age, which has become a lot longer now due to modern veterinary care, but in the past was generally considered to be between 12 and 14 years. So after living past their natural age, they can gain supernatural powers, mainly shapeshifting, and are now a bakeneko, or a changing cat. They can now transform into humans and integrate seamlessly into society. You could meet a person and never know they're actually a cat. Some bakeneko retain their cat appearance, but speak human language, wear human clothes, and walk on hind legs. Sound familiar? And while, to me, it does sound pretty cute, bakeneko are regarded as generally a little freaky and, at times, bloodthirsty. So, where does this tie into fairies? As I was saying, the concept of fairies, what they really are, can be a little difficult to pin down, much like the concept of yokai, and in a lot of the same ways. Some might say that fairies are a nature spirit. Another belief is that they are actually the spirits of the dead. And any good Irish farmer would probably consider a fairy to be a monster or a demon, given the harm they were believed to do to their livestock, property, and children. So, one could make an argument that yokai are the Japanese equivalent of Western fairies. Next, I want to read another comment posted by Jackalope, and it's quite long, so it kind of doubles as another story, but it's worth it. They write, "My grandmother told me about seeing a cat man when she was young. Not only her, but some people living nearby also used to see the same thing. My grandparents live in a small rural town in southeastern Brazil. Currently, the city has only about 30,000 inhabitants. At the time of the sightings, approximately between the 1950s and 60s, it was even smaller, with coffee plantations, forest areas, few houses that were away from each other, and unpaved streets. What she told me was that sometimes the neighbors had a feeling of being watched and would see, out of the corner of their eye, something about the size of a man, but with a head bigger than normal, oval-shaped, and with pointed ears. And it was wearing a sort of robe or cape, not very long. Sometimes this happened in the field, among the coffee trees, or when they were indoors, and the figure seemed to be peering through the windows, only to disappear when someone tried to better see what it was. But it never gave the impression of being inside the house, or closer than about 15 to 20 feet. My grandmother herself saw this twice. Once, she was newly married and lived in a house next to her parents at the foot of a hill where there was a vegetable plantation. She was washing clothes in a tub next to the kitchen door outside the house and then got up to get something inside. When she was coming back, she saw that a figure was standing between some trees at the end of the backyard. She was frightened and slammed the door, but when she looked out the kitchen window, nothing was there. On another occasion, she was in the truck with my grandfather, returning from a visit to a friend, and saw in the rearview mirror the same figure. But when she turned to look again, she couldn't see because of a turn in the road. Beyond this, the nearest neighbor reported seeing it more than twice while working in his garage. And her brother's wife also saw it sometimes while milking the cows. And some children on their way to school preferred to avoid a certain part of the path because of it, especially in the late afternoon. But 2 cases were the strangest, and I used to get very scared when my grandmother told me these stories as a child. A guy my grandpa knew was returning home on foot from the house of his bride late at night, along a road which was next to a ravine with a coffee plantation. He heard a noise, as if someone had slipped and fallen on the ground, and he looked back. He said that he saw the cat man about 20 feet from him, and he could not say exactly what he heard, but he was sure it said something to him. What did he do? He ran like crazy until he didn't hear the thing anymore. Then he noticed he was close to the house of a family he knew and immediately knocked on the door for help. The owners opened and let him in, drenched in sweat and very pale. The most interesting thing is that he thought he had run for 15 to 30 minutes until he reached the house, but to his surprise, shortly after he arrived, dawn was breaking. It didn't make sense to him. He had left his bride's home late, but before midnight for sure, and walked just a few minutes until seeing the thing behind him. It was like 5 hours had disappeared from his mind. The other case happened to a lady a bit older than my grandmother at the time, and that didn't live so close to my grandmother's house, but with whom they had a lot of contact because of the church service. The woman was in the house, sewing, while her husband was in another room, and their children were already asleep. She heard something, like there was people near the house talking. Thinking it could be her husband, who had gone out of the house to talk to a neighbor, she looked through the window and saw, next to the entrance, the cat man, and it seemed to be looking or speaking to someone a little farther off in the yard. She went to the window to see who was with him, but was unable to see anything. That night, the whole family slept together in the same room. I'll finish with 2 small notes. As I already said, the region was quite wild and still has many forests nearby. The people were already used to dealing with 2 kinds of monkeys common in the region, which are relatively large. Even today, these monkeys live in close proximity to the houses, and in the evenings, it is easy to hear their cries on the edges of the forest. So, with the exception of these 2 cases, it was always easy for me to think that people confused monkeys with a person or a cat man. But on second thought, big apes have a very different posture than the thing my grandmother described. The second note is that people in this region used to be quite superstitious. It was not the whole city that had sightings, but especially those who lived near a road known for being a place where they put despachos. I love that story, or stories. They are just so atmospheric and spooky. Perfect fireside tales. And they ring so similar to fairy encounters told by rural Irish farmers. There was also the missing time experienced by the man who was walking and thought only 20 minutes at most had passed when it ended up being more like 5 hours. I also must note that Jackie Lip's grandmother saw the figure at the end of the backyard, or what people from the UK would call the bottom of the garden, a location of one's property that is strongly associated with fairy sightings. Why that is, I'm not sure. Maybe it's because it's where one's property line meets the wilds, or perhaps it's just a boundary line, so a thin place. Anyway, it's well established that fairies are seen at the bottom of the garden, or the back of the yard, and it's even come up in stories that I've read on my channel. They don't really go into too much detail about what made this a cat man, besides, I guess, the pointed ears. Maybe there were other qualities the poster left out that gave this figure a cat-like appearance or quality. I did look up the 2 species of monkeys that they mentioned inhabiting the area. One is a type of spider monkey and the other is a howler monkey. And neither of them have pointed or really very defined ears. Anyway, I really loved those stories. Jackalope kind of stole the show with that comment, for me at least. But before we move on, let's jump back to the original poster story because they do give a couple of updates on the Catman. Update. My husband and I were discussing this with my mom last night when we noticed a drawing that my husband's little sister had given us for our wedding a few months ago. It was of a cat man. They don't have a cat, and neither do we. Next time we go over to their house, I'm going to ask her if she's had any visitors. Update. We went over to my husband's mom's house yesterday, and I got a moment alone with the children. He has 9 siblings, 3 of which are 5 and under. End quote. So, first she asks one of the children, who was 5 years old, if they have ever seen a cat that was the size of a person who wears human clothes, and the child says no. Then she asks the youngest child, who's 3.5 years old, the same question, who replies, "Oh, did you mean cat puppet? Yeah, I see him." The OP says, "What do you mean cat puppet?" And the child says, "He's a cat and he's big and wears clothes. I saw him behind the couch over there, but I've seen him lots of times." The OP asks, "What does he do when you see him?" And the child answers, "He just watches me." So, that is interesting and creepy. It's always creepy when children are seemingly involved in paranormal activity, right? But honestly, I'm not sure how to feel about that. It kind of seems like the OP was leading the witness a little bit, asking the children if they've seen a human-sized cat who wears clothes. It'd be easy for them to just say yes. And they could be at an age where they want to say yes and just be agreeable and suggestible. Although they claim that one of the children drew a picture of a cat man, but they don't specify if this was the same child that they talked to and who said they had seen the cat man. So, anyway, that's enough of cats for now, even though I do love them. Actually, when I was doing research on the Bakeneko, my cat did stand completely up on his hind legs. He was trying to size up a high windowsill. I will say he is well past 14 years. He's actually almost 18. So he does apply for being a goblin cat. And I think it's pretty safe to say he is. We are going to stay on Reddit for now, and next read a story from the Humanoid Encounters subreddit. This was posted by Eldest Freeman. For the last 15 plus years, I've been freaked out by this memory I have from childhood. I'm 30 now, and it still feels totally real. But the rational side of my mind has forced me to reconcile it as a strange, vivid dream. The memory is from when I was a young child, possibly 5 or 6 years old. My parents divorced right about that age, and in this memory, they're still together. It was Easter, or very close to it. My family owns 40 acres of land in the Catskills. I spent countless weekends up there through my life, and in this memory, most of my close family was up for the holiday. It was tradition to hide the children's Easter baskets and have the kids find them instead of eggs. The dream begins with it being Easter morning. The log cabin currently on the property wasn't built at the time, but we had a 2-car garage with a wood stove and a small camper. It was chilly that morning, and still early spring in upstate New York. My brother and I split up to search for our Easter baskets in the woods. I remember walking around the woods, surrounding the garage, and wondering where my basket would be. Just how far into the woods would my parents have placed it? My grandfather always smoked a pipe, and as I ventured deeper down the trail, I smelled a pretty familiar scent. I remember thinking, how did Pop get down here already? I was getting closer as the scent was getting stronger. Just then, I saw something I'll never be able to get out of my mind. A humanoid rabbit resting against a tree about 20 yards in front of me. It turned its head and looked right at me. All I felt was pure terror. I stared for a few seconds and turned around and ran for my life. I ran back to the garage in the safety of my parents. I remember crying hysterically and telling my father what I had seen. I remember my family surrounding me and calming me down while telling me I had imagined it and everything was okay. The memory fades from there. I don't remember the aftermath. 25 plus years later, I still have that image seared into my mind and cannot shake it. As I stated, the logical part of my mind has tried to convince itself that it was nothing more than a vivid dream or nightmare, but it's always there, lurking. And no matter how much time passes, I cannot seem to 100% convince myself that it was nothing more than the imagination of a 5-year-old. Okay, so they do admit that this experience could just be a dream, but something about it feels real. Now, they did say it was Easter, so that would make this the Easter bunny, right? When I was a kid, there was a dreaded tradition of being dragged to the local mall to have your picture taken with the Easter bunny, who was just some guy in a big bunny suit. I wonder if that's still a thing people do with their kids. I always found it very weird and uncomfortable, and I found the rabbit costume to be a little creepy. Something about the enormous eyes and the toothy grin slapped on the front of the oversized head. Anyway, let's read a bit more details the OP gives of the encounter in the comment section. Quote, "It didn't look like a cartoon bunny or cute. It scared the shit out of me. I remember thinking, monster. A few things stick out. I approached it from its 7 o'clock position. It heard me and turned its head. It was sitting against the tree. I believed that it was smoking the pipe I smelled, but I'm not 100%. And I vaguely remember it was possibly wearing some sort of leather or brown vest type garment. It's also hazy, but I remember its face and eyes, large rabbit eyes on a humanoid face, covered in fur with large rabbit Bugs Bunny type ears. It didn't make a sound, just turned slowly and looked at me and stared. I immediately froze and began to cry. My brain signaled run, and it did. My family still owns the property, and I still go back to the tree from time to time and wonder if what I saw was real or not. I just don't know anymore. As an adult now, it struck me as a horrific genetic splice between a human and rabbit. And you know how rabbits view you from the side? They don't really look directly at what they're looking at. That's what it did. It never turned and looked at me head on, just turned side profile and stared from that way. End quote. Okay, admittedly, I didn't really think this experience or dream or whatever it was all that creepy until they described it here as having large rabbit eyes on a humanoid face. That really spooked me. So just as in the last story we read, someone suggested that this could be a fairy, specifically citing the puka, which is a solitary fairy from Celtic folklore. We've definitely got a running theme, or co-theme, I suppose, of shapeshifters tonight. So, shapeshifting is an ability the puka is known for as well. They are said to take the form of various animals and usually have black fur and are much larger than the natural animal they resemble. If their size isn't a giveaway, their eyes are. Eyes that exude a mischievous intelligence. And if not that, then definitely their ability to speak human language. They appear most often as black dogs and sleek-coated horses, occasionally taking the form of eagles and hares. Puka are known to haunt mountainous regions, and this story did take place in the Catskills. So, what do you think? Was this just a dream? Was this a puka? Was this the Easter Bunny? Alright, so next we are going to take a look at a story from a website called the National Cryptid Society. And I think I might have stumbled on this website before. It looked a little familiar, but I don't think I've ever read anything from it. Picking through it again, I'm definitely going to have to look through all the reports there. People do send in their first-hand sightings with cryptids. And I looked through just a few of them, and there's some pretty good ones. So this is from that website, and this submission was anonymous, but it's called Strange Horse-like Creature. Prescott, Arizona is surrounded by national forest on 2 or 3 sides. The area near Thumb Butte has a very dreamlike atmosphere. My 2011 sighting was confirmed by a family in 2018. I was at Thumb Butte Road in Prescott at the city limits sign on my bike. Suddenly, 2 to 3 houses in front of me, 100 feet or less, was a 4-legged creature that was as big as a horse. It had 4 long legs like a horse. It immediately tensed up its whole body, ready to fight if necessary. Its face was round, brown beige fur. The fur formed a shaggy beard, almost mountain man-like. It was long at the chin and cheeks. I was on my bicycle. I hopped off and slowly walked backwards. Then I found another route to town. It was 3 p.m. in 2011. Most people on that road aren't home at that hour. It's very quiet. In 2018, my friend told me that his neighbor saw the same creature near Thumb Butte in the forest. His kids saw it, and he didn't believe them. They pointed this creature out, and he saw it too. Same description. That story reminds me of one I told in a video I did called Haunted Hikes, and I believe it took place in France or Italy, I can't remember. And a couple was hiking, and a woman was by herself, and she looked down and she saw this type of deer or antelope that's called a chamois, I think, but its face was flat, kind of like a human. And I said in that video, and I'll say it again now, that it reminds me of, as always, Princess Mononoke, one of my favorite movies. The forest spirit in that movie. It's like a weird deer creature, and actually kind of does have shaggy fur, but it has this flat human face that's really quite striking for sure, but a little unsettling. I actually made him the thumbnail, so if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's the guy on my thumbnail. They didn't really describe the face besides it being round. In Arizona, I don't think there's too many things that you would see that are as big as a horse that isn't a horse. I don't know my Arizona wildlife too well, but I liked that story, and I really liked this website. I did already set aside a couple stories, and I need to fully dig through. I did see at least one fairy sighting on there at a glance, so. All right, so now we are going to switch over to your ghost stories. And this took place in the Philippines and was submitted by Wisteria1. It's called The Giant Pig in the Woods. I have a story to share, though some of you may find it quite impossible, but it's true. It wasn't just me who witnessed it. Almost all my family saw it. Here in the Philippines, we have these creatures known as aswang or wakwak. They look like normal people during the day, but at night they transform into anything. Dogs, cats, birds, and, in this story, a pig. We went on a vacation in Bohol, an island in Visayas. It has become a Filipino tradition to visit loved ones living afar and celebrating the festivities with them, like a sort of family reunion. We got there, exchanged greetings and pleasantries with our relatives, and exchanged stories and laughter for hours on end. Now, there was one particular aunt I was really excited to meet, my tita, Mitch. She was so sweet, kind, funny, and 9 months pregnant. She was due just 3 days from when we arrived. I pointed out that there are no nearby hospitals anywhere, and the nearest was a 3-hour drive away. My uncle assured me that he had already contacted a midwife who was a family friend. Finally, Mitch's water broke on the second night, around 7 p.m. Everyone was so excited. My uncle hurriedly went and fetched the midwife while we were preparing stuff that would help with the labor. No more than 5 minutes later, my uncle came back with the midwife. Everything was set until the midwife stepped inside the house. Upon setting foot inside the house, she quickly pulled my uncle and my dad and told them that there's a black bird hiding in the kitchen and they should get rid of it. They quickly obliged and searched the kitchen, and they found it. A black raven, bigger than a normal raven, with glowing red eyes. My dad pulled a knife nearby and tried to stab the raven, but it quickly flew away. Following this event, the midwife told us to go to her place and take 1 sharpened bamboo for each of us, there were 9 of us there, and return to the house. We obliged, and when we got back, my uncle started placing us in strategic positions around the house, as if there was someone or something coming. 2 were placed on the east side of the house, facing the street, 50 meters away, 2 on the west, facing the nearby neighbors, 2 on the front of the house, and the remaining 3 of us were placed behind the house, facing the woods. Now, we sat there in the darkness, bracing ourselves for what was to come. We heard it before we saw it. A loud, sharp, deep squeal echoing through the woods. We bolted up, tightening our grips on our bamboo poles. The others that were placed on the other sides of the house quickly ran, and we were just standing there, waiting. Then it showed itself, emerging from the woods. The biggest pig we've ever seen, and I mean big. The tallest in our group was probably 5'9", but the pig was still taller. Eyes glowing red and foaming at the mouth, it crept nearer to us. None of us could even point our bamboos at it anymore. We were so scared. Just as I figured we were all dead meat, a loud boom echoed through the forest. The pig quickly ran into the woods, followed by my uncle and a group of his friends. They were all carrying hunting rifles. We didn't see what happened next, since we just stayed where we stood. All we heard were screams and lots of gunshots. When they finally emerged from the woods, about an hour later, my uncle told us what happened. They were chasing the pig, all while shooting at it with no luck. When one of his friends finally got a clean shot, it hit the side of the pig. The pig stopped and squealed, all while transforming back into an old man. Sounds impossible, right? It gets crazier. The next morning, we were having coffee on our veranda when a young man in his early 20s passed by our house and glared at us. We brushed it off until an old man passed by. He had no shirt on and a big bandage on his side. He glared at us like we killed his dog or something. So, yeah, that's my story. Sounds impossible, right? Well, it's true. Awesome story. The creature described in this story, the aswang, is another shapeshifter, and like the yokai and fairies we discussed earlier, not limited to one definition or set of characteristics. The aswang's appearance and behavior varies from village to village. Some Filipinos will know the aswang as a terrifying, viscera-sucking creature that appears as a long-haired, naked woman with enormous bat wings, but only from the waist up. Her body is crudely severed at the waist, leaving her own organs to grotesquely dangle out as she flies about looking for her favorite victim, pregnant women. Another version tells that it is a witch known to curse and cause illness, appearing as an old reclusive woman who lives in abandoned houses on the edge of town. Still, yet another version says that the aswang is a werebeast, usually a were-dog. Jordan Clark, who has studied folklore in the Philippines for over 20 years, writes in an article on his website, The Aswang Project, quote, "The were-dog is a mythological being said to be a man or woman by day, but at night to turn into a ferocious beast, principally a dog, known as aso in many Philippine languages. A werewolf is identified with the fiercest animal in a region, so that Europe has werewolves, China were-foxes, and India were-tigers. Since there are no wolves in the Philippines, the term were-dog is more appropriate, although the term were-beast may, in some cases, be even more applicable. A were-dog is said to reside in a village and turn into a ferocious dog, boar, or large cat at about midnight. So that is basically the same description that the OP gives at the beginning of their story. And an earlier article from 2015 by Jordan Clark says that pigs are, quote, the most common aswang configuration in the Philippines. Most aswang witnesses reported seeing them in this form, essentially just a scaled-up pig. Their arrival is heralded by snorting and gnashing of teeth. Only their sheer size gives them away, end quote. So that also tracks with what our witness described, a very large pig who was heard before it was seen. They heard it let out this really horrible squeal before it emerged from the woods. Very interesting. I had only, I was familiar with aswang, but I had only known of them to be those grotesque, viscera-sucking women who have the severed torso. I didn't know that they could be a werebeast or a giant pig or anything else. So really, really cool to learn that. Also in the story, before the giant pig arrived, the dangerous situation was heralded by a large red-eyed raven hiding in the kitchen. It's very possible this could have been an aswang as well. Quote, sometimes called tik-tik, it will look like a large man-sized vulture or raven. Apart from its great size, a dead giveaway would be its unusual ability to fly low and slow without the wings visibly flapping, even when the wind is still. So they didn't describe it as being quite that large, but they did say it was bigger than normal. That made me think about how, so the morning after the encounter with the pig, they saw an old man walk by who had a bandage on his side where the giant pig had been shot. So it was very possible that this could have been the aswang that showed up as a pig because the OP's uncle did see it transform into an old man. But before that, a young man walked by, glaring at them. I was thinking maybe he was the raven that was hiding in the kitchen. It's just my theory, just something I thought about. Let's take a look at some comments. Butte Inside says, quote, I find these aswangs very similar to our corredores, as they are normal people during the day and turn into an animal at night. Fortunately, corredores, or shapeshifters, are harmless here. Guess you are not that lucky. So this commenter, Butte Inside, seems to be cluing us into some Portuguese folklore. I came to that conclusion because I clicked on their profile and it listed their country as Portugal. And then when I looked up the word corredores with Portuguese folklore, I did come up with some results. So, corredores translates into runners. And from what I found, corredores can either be a witch or a werewolf, or maybe a mixture of both. I didn't find a ton of information, too many sources, that is. I feel like I gathered a lot of information from the few sources I did find. It's also possibly interchangeable with another word, correlarios. Sorry if my Portuguese is terrible. So I just found a few web pages written in English and a couple in Portuguese that I plugged into Google Translate. So I'm probably going to butcher this legend, but I will give my understanding of what I've read so far. And I'd love to hear from someone who knows more about this because it is a super interesting, dark, and complex folktale. So from what I gathered, basically, a corredores or a corredores de fado is someone who has been cursed. This curse could be transmitted from a family member after they've passed away, such as a mother or a grandmother. One article said that this could be passed actually physically, not necessarily through the bloodline, but say you're sitting with your relative, your grandmother, as she's on her deathbed, and you're holding her hand, and she has the curse. If you're holding her hand and she dies, it's transmitted to you. So the way to work around this is to hold a stick in your hand and have your grandmother hold the stick that's in your hand. And then that, I guess the curse would go into the stick and it wouldn't go into you. That I thought was really, really interesting. Another way you could get the curse is it could fall on a child who is the seventh child of the same gender in a row. For example, the seventh daughter born with 6 girls in a row before them. Or it could happen because the person's godparents misquote the lines during the baby's baptism, accidentally cursing the child with their fumbled recitation. Now, this curse plays out in an intriguing twist on the classic werewolf legend. At night, the corregidores will shapeshift into an animal. It could be a wolf, a dog, a pig, even a chicken or a duck. But no full moon is required for this transformation. In fact, this will happen every night. But this beast is not out for blood. Rather, they are just forced to run. Every night, they must correr o fado, or run the fate, which means running until they complete some cycle of 7. This could be running over 7 bridges, or 7 hills, through 7 crossroads, whatever it may be. But only after completing this task can they return home, regain their human form, and rest. Until the next night, that is. A corregidores is not inherently dangerous, as Butenside said. The only reason they would hurt you is if you find yourself in their path as they are running. They are compelled to complete their task, so anyone in their way is in danger simply by being there. And actually, the corregidores probably wouldn't even know they hurt you. It's said that they are in some sort of trance as they run their fate. Some people don't even know that they are a runner until the curse is broken. And how can the curse be broken? One way is if you come across a runner and don't get run down in the process, you can actually help them by harming them. The curse can be released through bloodletting, so making a small cut on the corregidores as they are running their fate can break the curse. Another way is to burn the corregidores' clothes, which are discarded before they begin their run. So that's my basic understanding of the corregidores de fado, and the little I know I find to be fascinating. I have never heard of anything like this, but there's something just very magical to me about this. It's a very enchanting version of the classic werewolf tales. And again, if you know anything about corregidores or anything similar to this, please let me know. I would love to learn more. I'd like to read one more brief comment before we move on. This was posted by Dennis from Hungary. Quote, "As a kid, I've heard lots of spooky tales about all sorts of unexplained events from old people. There was one about a farmer and something disturbing his horses in the middle of the night. After a while, he had enough and decided to conceal himself outside, and he saw a huge raven landing in the yard. Huge as in a 6-foot man was scared of it enough that he didn't do anything about it. So, the following day, he recruited some of his best friends, and they sat out there in the dark, waiting for the big bird to come. They couldn't kill it, but they managed to trap it in the barn. The next morning, they went to check on it and found a person who was reported missing 2 weeks prior." End quote. So yeah, the shape-shifting has really run throughout the whole episode, and that's not something I anticipated. I really just started pulling stories regarding weird animals that I had in my archive. Then when I started researching the folklore, all this shape-shifting started coming up. I loved all the stories, and I loved all the different folklore too. The Bakeneko, the Changing Cats, the Aswang, the Corregidores. Really, really cool stuff. A lot of new stuff to me. And I did have more than I intended on reading, but I just ran out of time. So we'll have to return to it. There's plenty more to explore. So that is going to conclude our stories and discussion and everything for this evening. But I do hope you enjoyed it as well. As far as strange animal sightings for myself, I don't really think I've had any. Although there are certain animals that you see and you just kind of get a strange feeling when you see them anyway, right? Like owls. I can remember almost every time I've seen an owl because it's just such a striking experience. Yeah, I don't know. There are certain creatures, animals that I meet out on my walks and my hikes that are perfectly normal animals, seemingly, but it's just something feels very magical about the encounter. And as far as natural animals, I love them dearly as well. I do have a strange little animal in my house. I have 2 cats. One I've talked about and who's been on camera before, Boo Radley. But I do have another cat whose name is Ingrid, and she actually has no eyes. My friend found her on the road all by herself when she was just a little baby. She still needed to be weaned. I'm thinking that her mother probably left her because she was sick. Her eyes were really, really infected to the point where I don't think she could see at that point anyway. And they were kind of bulging out of her head and really swollen. So my friend took her home, but he said he couldn't keep her. So he reached out and to look around for anyone who might be interested in keeping her. And I said, well, I will. Her eyes did end up having to be removed, but besides looking at her, besides her appearance, you can't tell that she doesn't have eyes. Besides her bumping into things, bumping into walls and things it happens a lot. But she is so amazing. I mean, she runs, she climbs. She is such an amazing creature. I'm really, really lucky to have her in my life. She is so cool. So anyway, please let me know any strange animals that you've encountered, or if where you're from has a cool shape-shifting legend or an interesting cryptid or anything like that. Thank you so, so much for tuning in. I will be back very soon. But until next time, take care and good night.